Shalom, shalom, everyone. What's up? It's your girl, Ashanti, 916 Shine. Want to say peace and blessings to everyone out there. Hope y'all had a good and blessed day so far. What's up? It's your girl, Ashanti. I do first want to apologize for having to do this video so late. I know I keep saying it, but you know, I'm making the disclaimer that I didn't link for this on purpose for Friday night. And actually, like walking distance down the street, there was a truck that crashed into two poles, which took down the power lines. It looked like a bicycle was involved, but I hope and pray that no one was hurt. And then, like down the street for me on the highway, the main highway, at the off ramp, 80 West, to get onto the main street to get to my house, there was a fatal car accident where two people lost their lives. So I want to send my condolences. A lot of stuff happened yesterday. Hopefully nothing else bad happened. This is take 2 of head coverings. The last video I did, I covered what the Greek word for head meant in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. I looked at some information that said that the word Kephale, or the word that Paul used for head, actually meant source. I also spoke about, you know, if Paul wanted to use the word to mean like leader, authority, or ruler or dominating person, he would have used maybe arche or exousia, those two Greek words. I do want to say that this is not about women empowering over men. This is not about men empowering over women. This is about, you know, just putting things back into the proper scriptural perspective. This is about restoring the balance that the Father had male and female in the Garden of Eden before the fall. We want to, you know, start living in the blessings and not the curses. We want to stop living in the fallen state. And in order to do that, we got to put out proper information. This is not to say that relationships are all out of whack and can't be restored. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that if you call your husband, you know, wives out there, I'm not saying that if you call your husband your head, if you see fit, that's definitely cool. What I'm doing is just, you know, putting out proper research information and materials so that you can go back and verify and validate. This is about a personal relationship and a personal walk with the Most High, the Lord God of Israel. I call him Yahweh a lot. So I know I'm taking time to make the disclaimers and things of that nature. So another thing I want to say, I might get into some bonus information about, you know, wearing pants and all that stuff and authority things. And also bringing more things out about this head covering and scarf cloth thing. What I am saying is, let the Holy Spirit lead you and guide you into all the truth. If you want to hold on to something for yourself, definitely go ahead and do that. The Father in heaven gives us all the choice of what we want to hold on to, what we want to keep, what we want to believe. That's our Yah given right. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that women can or cannot wear pants. I'm just putting information out there to set the record straight for genuine truth seekers. You know what I mean? That's what I'm doing. I'm not saying that if you do wear a head covering, you need to take it off. That's not what I'm saying. And in actuality, a lot of times when I pray, I wear a prayer shawl. Shalom, sis. A lot of times when I pray, I wear a prayer shawl over my head. So I'm not saying I need to, or am trying to convince you or persuade you not to do these things anymore. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just putting out proper information for 1 Corinthians 11. Lastly, this is about, like I said, restoring things back to their proper balance. Over in this walk, a lot of Israelites came in, and a lot of Israelite women came in, and they don't feel no love, no joy, no peace, no compassion. A lot of the women who are coming into this walk face a lot of misogyny from the men. I want to keep our men, some of our men, not all the brothers, but some of the brothers. I want to keep them in prayer. As women, we are to be prayer warriors for them. This is to show that some of our brothers who take on this misogynistic attitude and culture, they do it unknowing that they are doing it. They think it's the Bible. I'm going to show that it's not the Bible. I'm going to show that it's the culture of our oppressors. Also, if I get time tonight, hopefully time permits, but I'm going to take my time. Hopefully time permits. I'm going to show a few passages in the Tanakh, the Torah, Navi'im, the Ketuvim, or the Law of Moses, the prophets and the writings, or what some call the Old Testament. I'm going to show that a lot of the women in the Old Testament were very obedient to the Most High Yahweh, and they were treated as precious jewels made in the image and likeness of the Spirit of the Lord God of Israel. You know what I mean? A lot of the way the women were treated in the Old Testament is the way we should be getting back to. I'm going to show that after the children of Israel went into a lot of captivities, such as the Assyrian captivity, Babylonian captivity, and being under Roman imperial authority and suppression, you take on a lot of your captors' culture. You start assimilating into that culture. And a lot of what our brothers are doing, not all but some, they have taken on the Greco or Greek and Roman culture called Hellenization. Hellenization began in the early BCE era, before Common Era time. I would say during Alexander the Great, or Alexander the Greek, pretty much like, what is it, 6th, 5th, 4th century, 6th, 5th, 4th century BCE time, and probably a little earlier. A lot of the Israelite people were Hellenized. That means they were stripped of their culture or either took on the culture of the Greeks. And then the Romans picked up a lot of the culture of the Greeks, and a lot of Romans have put an impression upon some of our brothers out there. And this is what I want to say lastly before I get into this information. Over here in America, like I said, and this is for all people, but the descendants of slaves, our ancestors, were brought over here to America, and after they were freed in the 1800s, the late 1800s, a lot of the freed people were told to just, okay, go ahead and figure life out. And when our ancestors came over here, they were stripped of their language, they were stripped of their culture, they were stripped of their diet, they were stripped of their name, they were stripped of their deity. And so when you're stripped of all that, and then you're set free, well, you start to pick up the culture of your oppressors around you. And I'm here to show that a lot of the culture, a lot of the culture that our ancestors picked up was from the oppressors. And the oppressors, you see that they come from these European countries and nations. These European countries and nations are definitely influenced by the Greeks and Romans. So I'm gonna get into this thing. I got a lot of notes to read. Going to be going into 2 books online on Scribd app, scribd.com, and one of them is called Beyond Sex Roles, and the other one is called Paul and Gender, Reclaiming the Apostles' Vision for Men and Women in Christ. And the other books I'm going to be reading out of is Paul and Empire, Religion and Power in Roman Imperial Society by Richard Horsley. Roman Wives, Roman Widows, the Appearance of the New Women and the Pauline Communities, written by Bruce Winter. I know I got a glare, but I'd love to see that. And then after Paul left Corinth, The Influence of Secular Ethics in Social Change by Bruce Winter. All right. So once again, the word Kephale, let me start right here. The word Kephale in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, it means actual literal head. It means the source. Okay, you go back into the first video I did on that. I'm going to go into some more information about the word Kephale here. Let me share my screen. Actually, let me share my screen. Let me go into the book called Beyond Sex Roles. And if you have any questions, concerns, whatever, I have the live chat open. All right. All right. So this is from the book Beyond Sex Roles, what the Bible says about a woman's place in church and family. All right. I'm going to read to you just a little bit. We're going to establish some more information about 1 Corinthians chapter 11, what the word head actually means. All right. So this section is called Worship Protocols, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1 through 16. With this chapter begins a lengthy section of the epistle in which the apostle Paul deals with 4 issues that caused divisions within the Corinthian congregation. Chapter 11, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 1 through 16. One of the issues he deals with is divisive worship practices based on Judaizing hierarchical traditions. All right. Now, Judaizers are like they're the Pharisaic Jews who believed in like the oral Torah or the Talmud. You know, when the Messiah was refuting them in Matthew chapter 15 about washing their hands. It's okay to wash your hands, definitely, but they had this ritual of washing your hands. You know, first you pour on the left, then you pour on the right, then you pour back on the left. You know, so that was part of the oral law or the Talmud. So the Pharisaic Jews are the Judaizers. And they were heavily influenced by the Babylonians and the Greeks, and they adopted a lot of the Hellenistic views of Greece. And with them came a hierarchy, and they gained position with the Romans. You could go back and look at John chapter 11, verses 45 to 48. And then the Pharisees, they came on the scene, not just in the New Testament, but they came on in the Apocrypha. In the first book of Maccabees, chapter 7, verses 1 through 22. You can go back and look at that. First Maccabees chapter 8, verses 1 through 9, and verses 17 through 29. All right, let me continue. I know I'm going fast, but I got a lot of information to cover. The teachings of the Judaizers I just told you about in a synagogue. A synagogue was traditionally led by the ruler of the synagogue, right? The Judaizers were trying to force on the Corinthian congregation a lot of things that I was just talking about. The beliefs and practices that were promoted by the Judaizers concern a hierarchical order between men and women on the basis of the concept of the word head as it was used in the Old Testament and in their own language. They were also concerned about the Judaizers were concerned about the segregation of women from men in synagogal life and worship that resulted in the preclusion of female participation. They were also concerned about the erroneous postulations about the chronological primacy of man in the order of creation that exalted men as exclusive recipients of the image of God while depicting women as being accessory to men. And the last thing the Judaizers were concerned about is fanciful speculations about angels or messengers, in this case, with respect to women's head coverings. All right. So I want to establish something about the word head in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. The word Kephale, I stated before in the first video to this, that according to Liddell and Scott's Greek English lexicon, that gives first century AD definitions, proper first century AD definitions, the word head in 1 Corinthians 11 does not mean leader, ruler, or authority. It only means pretty much source or literal head. All right. So a lot of people want to go to 1 Corinthians 11 and say there is a hierarchy. Well, I'm going to show you that there has been historical evidence that shows Paul did not teach a hierarchy. All right. I'm saying that wives, we are to work with our men. Men, we are to work with wives. You know what I mean? We are to work together. If you look at Genesis chapter 1, it gives a commandment that says male and female, they are to rule and reign over the earth together, not each other. And if you go back and watch my video, Command or Curse, I go into more in-depth detail on that. All right. So I want to read this section here called No Hierarchy. In this text, Paul states that there exists a relationship of dependency between man and Christ, between woman and man, between Christ and God, defined by the word head. The point he makes in this text is that those relations are not hierarchical. They are defined by the special meaning that head have been given in New Testament churches as provider of life and growth. That's what Kephale means, right? The source. The source is the provider, right? In the Old Testament and in the Judaizers' language, head meant authority. In Corinth, the Judaizers used their own traditional version of the concept of headship as a weapon to force women into subordination, as was done in the synagogue. Their teaching may have been formulated as God is the head of Christ, Christ is the head of every man, man is the head of woman. The fact that this same heresy is also pronounced in our day for many pulpits can only reinforce our supposition. The New Testament meaning of head will be discussed below in our survey of the epistle to the Ephesians. And definitely we're going to talk about that later. You know, Ephesians 5, where they like to go into, oh, woman, you need to submit. Oh, we're going to talk about that too. All right. That's why I'm going fast in this. I'm going to make this video probably 3 hours. It's Saturday night. I know people in the East Coast, if y'all up, stay up. All right. It's going to be good. At this point, suffice it to state firmly that head in the language of New Testament churches did not mean authority or leader. In verse 3, now let me say this. I have been corrected in this walk plenty of times, and I have been corrected in this particular subject matter. You know what I mean? In this thing, I have to be open to correction because I'm genuinely trying to follow the Lord God of Israel. All right. In verse 3, Paul's ordering of the three sets of headship relations is evidently not hierarchical. He begins with Christ as head of man, man as head of woman comes second, God as head of Christ comes last. By any stretch of the imagination, this order cannot be viewed as a hierarchical sequence. Paul knew exactly how to structure a hierarchical order. All right. Let me stop screen sharing for a minute, see if I got any questions or concerns or anything. Shalom, Sister Angela, Mother Malaka. Shalom, Sister Angie. I hope y'all good and blessed and edified in this. All right. I'm going to come back on every now and then to see who's in the chat and things of that nature. All right. So I'm going to go back to the book. Let me screen share and continue. All right. Go back to beyond sex roles, okay? Had Paul wanted to establish a hierarchy in verse 3 of 1 Corinthians chapter 11, he would have typically arranged the headship sequence in a downward order of authority as God, Christ, man, woman. He could even have included the spirit in between Christ and man. This is precisely what he did not do. His structuring of the relations is entirely different. It is inconceivable that Paul would have so grievously jumbled the sequence in a matter involving God, Christ, and humans when he kept his hierarchy straight as he dealt with a lesser subject in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 28. All right. All right. I might talk about a bonus thing if I get some time to do it. It's a whole lot to talk about. All right, let me continue. To obtain hierarchical relations out of 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3, today, one must do violence to the text. One must do violence to the text. Its components must be taken apart and reassembled to suit such purposes. Such manipulations of scripture should be firmly rejected. The figurative meaning of head as provider of life will be discussed below. In the meantime, the point must be made that the text of verse 3 makes sense with this understanding of head when it is left intact and viewed within its larger context. In this section, which concludes with the declaration that everything comes from God, verse 12, and they use the NIV here. I don't use the NIV much, but I'd like to use the NASB, the ESV, and the scripture version, ISR. So in this section, which concludes with the declaration that everything comes from God, Paul shows that all relations of derivation find their origin in God. He was the initial giver of all life, but in chronological sequence, the origin of man was in Christ, the logos of creation. Second, the origin of woman was man, since she was formed from him. Third, the origin of the incarnate Christ was God with the birth of Jesus, Yeshua, the Son of God. The sequence of relationships designated by head in this verse does not justify a hierarchical interpretation of it. The apostles' use of the word head to describe servant, provider of life relationships served as a rebuff to the Judaizers, who exploited it from within their own hierarchy obsessed tradition to marginalize the Corinthian women in the life and ministry of the church. So let's go back here. I want to read something to y'all. This is from Matthew chapter 20, and for the believers in Yeshua or Jesus Christ, right? I got to read something. The mindset of Yeshua we are to have, and this is the mindset that he had. This is Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20. Let me start at verse 20. It says, then the mother of the sons of Zabdi came to Yeshua with her sons, bowing down and making a request of him. And he said to her, what do you wish? I'm reading from the scriptures version, ISR, right? She said to him, command that these two sons of mine sit, one on your right hand and the other on the left, in your reign, in your kingdom. But Yeshua or Jesus answering said, you do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink, and to be immersed or baptized with the immersion that I am immersed with? They said to him, we are able. And he said to them, you shall indeed drink my cup, and you shall be baptized with the baptism that I am immersed with. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father. You know, mankind has this thing about wanting to rule. That's what it meant by sitting on the right hand and sitting on the left. If you got that much power to dominate people, then people take advantage of that. You know what I mean? That's what these cats was trying to do, pretty much. They was trying to get this authority to rule and dominate over people. Listen to what Yeshua says just a little bit later. Verse 24. And when the 10 heard it, they were displeased at the two brothers. Of course they were displeased, because I was telling you what they were doing, right? It says, but Yeshua or Jesus called them near and said, you know that the rulers of the nations, the Gentiles. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles or nations are masters or lords over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you, let him be your servant. Even as the son of Adam did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So that's the attitude and the mindset. Anybody who's great and grand, if they want to be great and grand, they're supposed to have this attitude of being in servitude, humility, humble, be there for the people. You know what I mean? All right. Let me continue with some of this information here. All right. Actually, let me see something here. All right. Thank you for tuning in. Now I'm going to read something about the word head or Kephale as used in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. I'm going to go to this book called Women, Authority, and the Bible. You can see it online. That's where I'm about to pick it up. It's actually online here in this Google Books. Let's share the screen. I'm not going to read all of it because it's a whole lot to read. But it's got some good information. This is for you to go back and verify, validate everything I'm saying. You know what I mean? People want to know, Shanti, what do you study? How do you study to get all this information? You know, what's your personal relationship and walk like? You know, I pray a lot, meditate a lot, converse a lot with the Father. You know what I mean? I know my husband, he was like, man, you know, when we get the new house, he was always saying, Shanti, you need a place to go cry, meditate, pray, and study. And I was like, man, thank you. So I do spend a lot of time with the Father. So the reading is one thing, the knowledge is one thing, but you know, getting in tune with the Holy Spirit to lead, guide, and convict. I spend a lot of time with the Father so I can hear in that still small voice. All right, so this is the book called Women, Authority, and the Bible, edited by Albera Mickelson. Mickelson definitely has been challenged on the meaning of Kephale, but you know, there's always a debate, because people are going to believe what they want to believe regardless of the truthful information they have in front of them. So this is the information I'm going to pull out about what does Kephale mean in the New Testament. All right. The belief of some Christians that the Bible teaches a hierarchy with men in a role of authority over women, basically over all women, and very specifically over their wives, is based largely on two references by Paul to males or husbands as the head of women or wives. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3, and Ephesians chapter 5, verse 23. All right. I'm not going to read all of this. I'm just going to read portions. The American Heritage Dictionary gives as one meaning of head, one who occupies the foremost position, leader, chief, or director. The Thayers also does that as well, but we're going to talk about something in a hot minute about this Thayers and any other Greek lexicon besides the Liddell and Scott's. All right. Only in this way in our everyday speech. All right. He is the head of his company, or he is the department head. All right. To understand what the Apostle Paul really meant when he wrote about man or husband being the head of the woman or the wife in 1 Corinthians and Ephesians 5, we must carefully examine the meaning of the word Kephale, head, in the Greek of Paul's day. All right. All right. So this is what I'm going to talk about here. The challenges of translation. The most complete Greek English lexicon covering Homeric, classical, and Koine Greek. Homer, he's a poet. Homer is a poet who lived around, the 8th century BC. He wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, and he talked a lot about the Trojan War, right? So the most complete Greek English lexicon in current existence is a 2-volume work of more than 2,000 pages compiled by Liddell, Scott, Jones, and Mackenzie, published first in 1843. Let me stop screen sharing and let me show y'all what I mean. This right here is available. This gives original Greek word definitions, especially those in 1st century AD in the New Testament. It gives the proper Greek word definitions. All right, so the Greek word definitions it has in it are those from 1000 BCE to about 600 AD. All right, this is an intermediate Greek English lexicon, Liddell and Scott. All right, you can definitely find this online. The original 2-volume work is about $150, $200, but this one right here, I think it cost me I don't know, somewhere between 40 and 50. It's worth it though. It's definitely worth it. And it has more proper definitions in it than Thayer's has for some Greek words. Promise you. So that's that. Let me get back to this. Let me get back to what I was reading here. All right. So the Liddell, Scott, Jones, and McKinley Greek English lexicon, it is based on examination of thousands of Greek writings from the period of Homer, about 1000 BC, to about AD 600, right? A period of nearly 1600 years, including the Septuagint and New Testament times. This lexicon lists, with examples, the common meanings of Kephale. All right. The list includes more than 25 possible figurative meanings in addition to the literal meaning of physical head of man or beast. The list does not include authority, superior rank, leader, director, or anything similar as a meaning. Okay, there is an older Greek Latin thesaurus published in 1851, but written primarily in the 16th century. It also gives no meanings such as authority over or supreme over. Apparently, ordinary readers of Greek literature during the New Testament times would not think of final authority, superior rank, or director as common meanings for the word translated head. All right, and it talks about the entry of the 1940 edition of the Liddell, Scott, Jones, and McKinsey lexicon, right? Right. So it has some more writings and information here about the word Kephale as its original meaning. All right, and you can go back and check this out yourself. This is there's no ebook for this available. I'm looking at the pages they are allowing us to see online for free. You know what I mean? It has a lot of information here. Wow. I mean, I'm not going to read all of it, but I'm giving you a little gist of what it's talking about so you can go back and study this information for yourself. All right? All right. Still got a few of y'all hanging with me. Shalom, shalom. I hope y'all doing cool tonight. All right. Let's go into a book now. Woo-wee. Let's go into a book. Whoops. Let's go into a book. I'm fumbling. Foul on the play. Fumbling. Roman Wives, Roman Widows. Bruce Winter. If any of the books I put up, if you can get them, oh my gosh, go ahead and get them. To have in your arsenal. And this is for uplifting my sisters. I know in this walk, some of our brothers are treating us like crap. But, you know, if they wake up breathing tomorrow, they have a chance to get it correct with the Most High. And that should be our prayer as women warriors in this thing. That should be our prayer. So let me go here. I'm going to read to you a section. What is this? This is chapter 5 of this book, page 77. This chapter is called The Appearance of Unveiled Wives in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 2 through 16. All right. This is some powerful stuff, y'all. It be blowing my mind every time I go back and read it. Every time I share it, it be blowing my mind. Check this out. In the last 3 years, significant new material has been published by ancient historians, which throws important light on the issue of veiling in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 2 through 16. Wives praying and prophesying with their heads uncovered in the Christian gathering were replicating the attitude and actions of new wives. Now, pay attention to that word, new wives. I'm going to be giving a lot of information about these new wives, who they were, what they were doing, so forth and so on. All right. So right then we can see that women can speak in the assembly. If you're praying and prophesying, you're speaking, and you're speaking for edification purposes, right? 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And I'm going to bring out some information about 1 Corinthians chapter 14 in a little bit. But let me read this chapter here, chapter 5. The appearance of unveiled wives in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2 to 16. All right. Check this out, y'all. This section is called The Significance of the Veil in Marriage. The veil was the most symbolic feature of the bride's dress in Roman culture. Don't that sound familiar in a lot of our traditional weddings? Now we know where this veil comes from when the bride walking down the aisle. So the term veiling the bride was the marriage ceremony. Other writers in the early empire confirmed that the bride's veil was an essential part of her apparel. The Romans evidently thought of her as one who was clouded over with a veil, because Felix, writing in the late 4th century AD, speculated on the nexus of the Latin word for cloud, nubis, to be married, nubere. Nuptials are so-called, nuptials. Nuptials are so-called because the head of the bride is wrapped around the bridal veil, which the ancients called to cloud over or veil. I'm gonna go fast in this thing. This video, y'all might have to go back and watch this video 3-4 times, take some notes. All right, so this guy named G. Davies, in an essay, Clothes as a Sign. This essay is called Clothes as a Sign, the Case of the Large and Small Herculaneum Women. There are 2 distinct statue types, and this is like the archaeological evidence that goes to show is information that confirms Roman law. Women, wives had to cover their head, All right, so 2 distinct statue types in the 1st century. They borrowed from early Hellenistic period Herculaneum statues depicting modest married women. The female figure was sculptured wearing the veil, thus representing the married woman. So like I said, this veil was a Roman law for married women to wear. And we're going to talk about that right after I finish this chapter. We're going to talk about who made this marriage law. Man. All right, so the woman in these statues were in a long dress, a large mantle drawn around her, which she used to cover the back of her head to form the marriage veil. Her right arm was drawn across her body to hold her veil in place on her head so that the right breast was hidden from view. These statues were heavily draped, not much body showing. So with their modesty often reinforced by a lowered gaze and veiled. Okay, the smaller statue type had 2 important distinguishing features. One, the right arm was bent at the elbow, and the hand touched the mantle at the top of the right shoulder. The left hand was not relaxed, but rested protectively on her thigh, and also revealing only the tips of her fingers instead of her whole hand. This represented unmarried woman who was expected to arrive at her marriage a virgin, since more guarded body language, hence that's why you had more guarded body language. Okay, the second feature was the absence of any veil, with the mantle drawn over her shoulder and not her head. All right, I'm still reading from this book, Roman Wives, Roman Widows. We're not Romans. I mean, we can learn some good things about what Paul had to say to these assemblies in Corinth, but we're not Corinthians. We're not Romans. All right, in his essay, Levels of Concealment, the dress of the Heterai in Greek text, Dalby also discussed the distinguishing features of the immodest woman, whether she is a high-class, promiscuous person who entertained at the dinners of the rich, or the prostitute who serviced clients from other classes. So he notes that the Heterai not only wore more clothes than other women, but also finer ones. The Heterai were high-class prostitutes. They were demanded. It was a Roman law that these high-class Heterai prostitutes could not wear a piece of cloth or veil on their head. That signified that they were prostitutes. And the men, it was legal for the men to go around and sleep with them whenever they wanted to. They would take these Heterai, or high-class, the men, the married men, would take these Heterai, high-class prostitutes, to these dinners or banquets. And if their head was uncovered, people around knew that it wasn't his wife. They knew that was his little, companion for the night, if you will. Right? This was going on in Roman Corinth, y'all. Woo! So a competitor, this Hyatirae, this high-class prostitute, was a competitor for her husband's attention, dressed better, more visibly, more expensively, more showily than other women. In such Greek views, dress mattered to Hyatirae. They needed to catch the eye. Don't that sound like a lot of what's going on today? Solomon said, there ain't nothing new under the sun. This is funny, y'all. All right, let me continue. The other feature that stood out and was linked to the dresses of Hyatirae was gold ornaments. Dalby concludes that Hyatirae, these high-class prostitutes, compared with ordinary prostitutes, did not need to advertise their wares in public because they already had a distinguishing feature. They wore transparent veils that were fastened at the shoulder with a brooch, unlike the marriage veil, where a large mantle was drawn over the top of the head. So in Rome, you wore what you wore. In Corinth, you wore what you wore. In Ephesus, you wore what you wore. These are Roman colony cities. Right? This comes from a section, the significance of the removal of the veil in public. All right. Let's see. Isidore is cool because he in Genesis chapter 10, where it talks about the table of nations, he actually puts them in a sequence of saying what their modern name is now. What their Bible name was, and he puts it into proper context of what their nationality name is known now. This is Isidore, right? So he argued that an adulteress wore an amiculum, the linen pallium dress of the prostitute. The woman was not permitted to wear the stola or vitae, right? Instead, according to custom, the woman divorced for promiscuity wore a plain toga. So we're seeing that, they had these Roman laws in place telling you what you had to wear to signal what type of woman or person you were, right? Right. All right. She had lost her status and role as a sexually mature woman in Roman society. If you were married, you were a stola. If you were not, you were a toga. Praetexta, if you were still a child. Plain, if you were an adulteress. So you can go back and look at these dresses, these type of clothing apparel that the people were wearing, right? Watch this. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 5. Itself provides an explanation of the significance of removing the marriage veil. It is one and the same thing as having your head shaved. Dio Chrysostom noted that a woman guilty of adultery shall have her hair cut off according to the law and play the prostitute over in Cyprus, right? That was a rule from Cyprus. All right. All right, this is a section here called Modest and Immodest Appearances in Roman Law. All right. In his book, Law and Life of Rome, J. Crook argued it is impossible to deal with Roman law and Roman society as if they were autonomous spheres. He has demonstrated that essential aspects of Roman society were consciously built on Roman law and operated on that basis. It is expected that the important social symbol of the veil and other distinguishing garments worn by married women would be underpinned by Roman law and be observed in the Roman colony of Corinth. Corinth was a Roman colony. Right? Right. A first century married woman had to take personal responsibility for the way she dressed. Let me read this. The woman who committed adultery was condemned, but a distinction was observed in law for the victim of a forced sexual assault. She was declared innocent, suffered no loss of respectability, and was not thereby ineligible for marriage. All right? All right. 77, 96. Well, I got a lot to read from this chapter. Okay. Hold on, y'all. I apologize for that. I got doggies in the house that act like little children. You know what I'm saying? All right. All right. So this is where I'm going to go to. I was going to go into some information about Augustus Caesar legislating marriage laws, and I'm going to go into that, but I'm going to read a little bit about this here, just for a hot second. All right. Just for a hot second. So Augustus's legislation sought to distinguish between the modest wife, the adulteress, and the prostitute. So Augustus Caesar had these Lex Julia Laws, and he was pretty much ruling over people's marriages, you know, telling women what to wear, telling men they can go out and have adultery legally, telling women if they were caught in adultery that they were subject to criminal punishment, which was death. All right. All right. So women convicted of adultery were also compelled to wear the toga as a symbol of their shame. The Lex Julia Laws specifies certain articles of clothing, such as stola. It was suspended from the shoulder by straps and covering the feet, and vitae, a woolen band used in women's hairstyles. So a vitae, V-I-T-T-A-E, a woolen band used in women's hairstyles, and forbade these to be worn by prostitutes. So matrons were not compelled by law to wear the stola and the other matronal articles of clothing, but they did symbolize and advertise the wearer's chastity. So the clothing was legislated by these Roman politicians. All right, this is called official policing of dress codes on religious occasions. Now, doesn't policing sound like what's going on today with some of our Israelite brothers? They want to go around and police women on what they're wearing. Woman, you can't wear pants. Woman, you got to have your head covered. They're going around policing. You know where they're getting policing from, unbeknownst to them? The Romans. Let's read it. Daniel Ogden has drawn attention to what he sees as a failure on the part of ancient historians to discuss the important civic role of the controllers of women in Roman times. All right. That the public department of freeborn women, who were not slaves, right, was the object of civic surveillance, is shown by the existence of a gynaikonomos, a type of magistrate widespread in the Greek world by the 1st century BC. It was also prevalent in the following centuries. So this person was a spy, the dress police. The police went around making sure if you was married that you was wearing the proper attire, and if you was unmarried or a prostitute, they was policing you, making sure you wore the proper attire to signal that you was a prostitute. I gotta laugh at this stuff, man. This is crazy. Sarah Pomeroy, in a brief discussion of the role in Sparta, speaks of state surveillance of women's activities. Gynaikonomoi in other poleis means cities, not only supervised women, but imposed sumptuary restrictions. They were to enforce sumptuary laws curb excessive spending by women on clothing for religious festivals, restrict the competitive display of wealth, promote female chastity for the sake of fathers and husbands and the gods, which is the pagan gods, right? And standardize dress in processions. You have the clothing police. The clothing police. Hey, does anyone dare to take this back to the Israelite brothers? Does anyone dare to take this to the pastors, preachers, ministers, teachers, rabbis, mores? You know, I think more people need to hear this information. If they knew what they was acting like, if they knew they was acting like their oppressors, I think they would go spend some time with the Father and want to get some correction through the Holy Spirit. Let me continue. This is the same section about these clothing police. All right. To enforce these roles, they had official powers to confiscate women's clothing, to impose certain fines, and to restrict their conduct. They could tear or confiscate in public a dress that was considered offensive and dedicated to the gods, dedicated to the pagan gods. This is crazy. This public humiliation for the woman involved. This would be public humiliation, pretty much. All right. They could also exclude women from public participation in festivals and sacrifices and downgrade women to a lower status on their festival list. Plutarch traced the origins of this office back to the classical Greek period of Solon, Solon, whose laws prohibited wild and willfully disorderly behavior on the part of women. Plutarch, this is his comments. Check this out. Most of these practices are also forbidden by our laws, Roman laws, but ours contain an additional proviso such that such offenders shall be punished by the supervisors of women. So these supervisors of women were going around policing what they wore. You could be having your clothes torn off in public and humiliated, and it was legal. This is Roman law. We ain't supposed to be acting like the Romans. Ogden examines dress codes of women who participated in the religious processions connected with the cult of Demeter. I might talk about that later in another video, the cult of Demeter. I know she is one of the main deities and where, Thanksgiving comes from. The dress of women was very closely defined by their class. For example, matrons, girls, and slaves, and also by their status within the code. The aim was to restrict elaborate dress and place a ceiling on how much money could be spent. Ain't that sound like what's going on today? Men got a problem with women spending money. They're talking about, oh, you spend too much money. But let these men get a hold of money. They want to go buy cars, jewelry, shoes, weed, music. You know what I'm saying? Woo! They talking about women, y'all spend too much money. They got a problem with women trying to get red bottoms. But they over here trying to get Benzes, Beamers, and Lexuses. All right. A city warden or boy warden. Actually, let me say that again. The office was clearly an honorous one, as has already been noted, and those elected to this honorary public liturgy discovered it was no sinecure. A person who dreams of being a city warden, boy warden, is beset with worries and anxieties concerning his state, his children, or his women, in reference to the burden of responsibility of the separate offices. So evidence of this office, these clothes police, evidence of this office has been found at Sparta in Achaia, Achaia. You can read about that in the book of, Acts, chapter 18. I'm really bringing out a lot of historical information about a lot of the New Testament documents, such as Acts, Corinthians, Ephesians, Colossians, and a little bit of Thessalonians. All right. The office operated according to the ancient traditions and the laws of Sparta. So we ain't talking about the laws of Yahweh, the Lord God of Israel, being imposed on people. We're talking about these city-state laws of Rome and these Greeks. Right? So cartilage suggests that at Sparta, the post is attested from the Augustan until the late Severan age, and the need for assistance in policing dress codes was not because there was a greater degree of immorality among Roman Spartan women, nor does the women's fear at Roman Sparta display any of the license for which it was notorious in classical times. The local society valued the domestic virtues in women as those held up for praise by Plutarch of Chaeronea. In this period, Greece's fullest surviving spokesman on themes of love, women, and marriage. All right, this office clearly aimed to restrain women's conduct in public. All right, there is firm evidence that Corinthian women were connected to the cult of Demeter, which we know operated in Roman Corinth in Paul's day in the temple on the slopes of the Acrocorinth overlooking the city. Curse inscriptions written by women have been discovered there. They were cursing the women. This is where all this misogyny comes from that some of our Israelite brothers want to take on. But they want to call us feminists. Let me continue. Do we have evidence that information concerning the conduct of married women while worshiping would have leaked out beyond the gathering of Christians in Corinth? 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 23 reveals the presence of outsiders and unbelievers at the gatherings, with the implication that this was not unusual. The layout of the house, the main room, would have been the place where they met, and it was immediately accessible from the entrance. To refer to the house churches, the term consistently used in the New Testament is more specific. All right. A clue may rest in the fact that wives were under obligation to wear the veil because of the angelos. Angelos is translated in our Bibles as angels. And when people think of angels, they think of some people with wings. But angels, in this sense, are messengers. Messengers, you know, take some messages in. They take in some information. They take in the memo and they go out and they spread that information to people they're going to tell it to on the outside. Watch this. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 11, right? When Paul said the women must wear the veil because of the messengers. We're going to see what the messengers were. So I have argued elsewhere. This is the author speaking. I have argued elsewhere that the term should be messengers. That word was used also of those who came to carry information away to others. Epictetus, right? He was writing in the early 2nd century AD, provides evidence of this. What messenger is so swift and so attentive as the eye? He noted of one who could be sent out as a scout to report back. All right. Epictetus also reported that after Domitian banished the philosophers from Rome, a young man from Nicopolis was sent to Rome to spy out the land on their behalf. Philosophers had been banished from Rome from time to time by a number of emperors, hence the need for a messenger to report back to those exiled from the capital of the empire on whether it was safe for them to return. Right? Hey, how are you? Who said, hey, how are you? Who's that? I'm not familiar with that. It's just the number one. Shalom, shalom. Yeah, that's true. That's true, Sister Malaka. That is true. Policing people. We see a lot of policing going on in America, right? You know who the Americans get it from? The Romans. All right, let me continue. So it is suggested that the impression given to the information gatherer is Paul's concern. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 10, when he talks about the angels or the angelos, he means messengers, people who are going to report back. They're going to report back that these women are taking their veils off. And you know, you don't want to get caught in Roman Corinth as a married woman with your veil off, because you liable to criminal punishment, which is death. Let me continue. So this is the reason for wearing the marriage veil while praying and prophesying. See, we have to follow the laws of the land still. You know what I mean? We have to follow the laws of the land still. Paul wanted to establish these Israelite communities who believed in Yeshua the Messiah, but he also wanted to make sure that he did not disrupt the Roman law, because Roman law did some crazy things to the people, especially women. Let me continue. Been about an hour. Okay. So statue types of Livia. Livia is one of these historians too. Statue types of Livia, the wife of Augustus, right? The wife of Augustus, in the role of priestess with her marriage veil drawn over her head. We can see that, right? There's these statues, there's these archaeological evidences over in Roman Corinth, you know, being dug up and found, right? Wives participating in pagan religious activities would have had the marriage veil drawn over the top of their heads. It can be concluded that those wives who undertook religious functions would have covered their heads with the marriage veil, given that all respectable married women would wear their veil outside the home as Roman law and custom prescribed. Let me say that again. It can be concluded that those wives who undertook religious functions would have covered their heads with the marriage veil, given that all respectable married women would wear their veil outside the home as Roman law and custom prescribed. This raises the possibility that those who sent messengers to spy out the activities of the Christian gatherings could have reported to the men elected to officially supervise women's dress codes in Corinth that some Christian married women were inappropriately attired while engaging in a religious activity. The other possibility is that messengers simply came to report back to a member of the elite of Corinthian person, curious but did not feel free to attend in case it was a political gathering. So Augustus Caesar, right, his Lex Julia Laws, Augustus had legislated against the political activities of associations as soon as he had secured power. And all the emperors in the Julio-Claudian dynasty, apart from Gaius, right, remained highly suspicious of them. So a client of a patron or a trusted household servant would have been a safe person to send to see that this meeting did not breach Roman law. In sending messengers, their deliberate removing of their veils, the married women, right? Their deliberate removing of their veils while praying and prophesying would have sent a signal that they were identifying themselves in this religious gathering with the new women who behaved loosely at banquets, which were often held in private homes. All right. Let me continue. Y'all enjoying it so far? I got to get weak. Oh my gosh. All right. I'm still reading from this book, Roman Wives, Roman Widows, Bruce Winter. This is a very good arsenal, very good to have in your arsenal. All right. It was later said to be shameful for a woman to speak in the Christian meeting in the context of weighing up of prophecy, even as the law says. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 34. let me say something about this. That is an interpolation, which means the scholars have looked at old manuscripts and they have seen that 1 Corinthians chapter 14 verses, what is it? 33, 34 is an interpolation. It was not in the original manuscripts. It is an addition later by a copyist, somebody who wanted to put their little agenda into the text. Paul did not say that. Actually, let me give you guys some information where you can go research what I just said. There's this guy named Philip B. Payne. Let me put it in here. Let me put it in the chat section. There's some articles here. There's some articles here where he talks a lot about textual criticism in the Greek language. He's talking about different manuscripts, Codex Fuldensis, Codex Vaticanus. He's talking about 1 Corinthians chapter 11. He's talking about 1 Timothy chapter 2. And he's also talking about 1 Corinthians chapter 14. Yeah. If you go to publications on that website and then you go to articles, you can see the articles where he's bringing out information on textual criticism. He actually does some great research on interpolations. Interpolations are copyist editions that are not in the original manuscripts. All right. Oh, let me show you guys something else as well before I continue reading. I'm going to try to give you guys as much information as possible. Let me see. If you want to go and look at some of the early manuscripts for the New Testament, you could go to this site right here. It's called earlybible.com. Earlybible.com. It has papyri, the original manuscripts of the New Testament. A lot of people say, "Oh, I believe the New Testament was originally written in Hebrew." Well, there's solid evidence for the book of Matthew, as we have the Hebrew Matthew Shem Tov available to us online. We have that original Hebrew text, the book of Matthew. But as far as Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, Corinthians, Ephesians, etc., the evidence that we have for those is that they were originally written in Greek, and some of the papyri is here. This papyri, number 46, this is a big one. It has a lot of papyri from Romans, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Hebrews. For Ephesians chapter 5. And Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22, the verb submit, hupatasso, something like that, is not there. It's actually pulling that word from verse 21. And I'm going to talk about mutual submission just a little bit later. But this is the original papyri for Ephesians chapter 5. With my basics of biblical Greek knowledge that I have of just the alphabet, alpha beta, I can read a little bit of it, but everything's in like lowercase letters, and there's no punctuation, so I'm gonna have to get used to it. So that's that right there. I think if you go and you take your mouse over it, you kind of blow things up and make them bigger so you can read things. I'm gonna have to get more used to this. So let me stop sharing. All right. Let me continue reading from Roman Wives, Roman Widows. All right, so it was later said to be shameful for a woman to speak in the Christian meeting in the context of weighing up of prophecy, even as the law says. We know that's not true because 1 Corinthians 11 says women were allowed to pray and prophesy. So check this out. Mosaic law, the law of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. In Mosaic law, no specific injunction can be cited from it that forbids women speaking in the assembly. Women were not to intervene in public settings or come between two parties. Now that's Roman law. And an imperial ban had already existed from the time of Augustus on women intervening on behalf of their husbands in the context of legal argument. Hopefully I've noted to read that, but a lot of the women were so educated and smart. A lot of the Roman imperial people in high positions, they didn't want the wives intervening for the husbands because the wives were so smart and educated that they were winning these legal cases and people were losing money. So in order to stop people from losing money, because these women were highly educated, they banned these women from speaking in these legal public things. Hopefully I get to read that later. The disruption of Carphania. Okay, well, this is specifying it here. So this woman named Carphania. The disruption of Carphania from a previous era was still being held up as a negative example and was seen as the excuse for this prohibition. Let me read that real quick. 177, 178. I'm going to page 177 and 178. Carphania, she was a senator's wife. She died circa 48 BC. She was ever ready for a lawsuit. She always spoke on her own behalf before the praetor. So by constantly plaguing the tribunals with barking, to which the forum was unaccustomed, she became a notorious example of female licentiousness, so much so that women of shameless habits are taunted with the name Carphania by way of reproach. Carphania's actions produced a change in the law that forbade women from expounding one's own or a friend's claim before a magistrate or refuting the claim of another. According to Roman legal history, the origin of the prohibition was introduced by Carphania, a very wicked woman. They called her this. They called her wicked because she was smart in winning these cases, right? She was disturbing the magistrates and providing the reasons for the edict. In regards to sex, there was a prohibition for women from bringing a request on behalf of others, so that women do not get themselves mixed up in other people's lawsuits, contrary to the modesty of their sex, and perform a male role by involving themselves in the cases of others. So they were saying that it was a male's job to win cases and win people money, not the woman. You know what I mean? I think I'm gonna read this section later. Let me see. Do I have it here? 177, 178. Yep, I do. All right, I might get to that later. All right, so the reason already given as to why the wife had to wear the marriage veil while praying and prophesying was that she was under an obligation to do so. Obligations were binding in Roman culture. Roman culture. This ain't nowhere in the Mosaic law. Nowhere in the Mosaic law. In this case, married women had to wear the marriage veil. Otherwise, their action would be misunderstood. And this section is called appearing to be contentious. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, it states that if people appear to be contentious, we do not have such custom. This is going to explain what this contentiousness is and what it was all about. All right, so verse 16, it states that they appear to be contentious. The Stoics, who are also a form of the philosophers, right? You can see that Paul was up against the Stoics and the Epicureans in Acts chapter 17. That's who he was debating with, you know, and Paul, he knew when to walk away from a debate. We're going to talk about these Greek philosophers in a hot second, all right? So the Stoics said that the new Roman women was contentious. The contentiousness of these women may well explain the use of the prefix kata being added to the verb to describe the strength of the action, that it was a deliberate one, hence a choice over alternatives. They deliberately did this in front of the congregation to signal something or to make a statement. So examples in the New Testament where kata means down from, in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 4, the veil is hanging down from the head. All right, so by deliberately removing her veil while praying, by deliberately removing her veil while playing a significant role of praying and prophesying in the activities of Christian worship, the Christian wife was knowingly flouting the Roman legal convention that epitomized marriage. In so doing, she was sending a particular signal to those gathered. It appears that she was not only indifferent to looking disreputable by first century standards, but by deliberately removing the marriage veil, she was being contentious. If, according to Roman law, she was what she wore, or in this case, what she removed from her head, this gesture made a statement in support of the mores of some of her secular sisters, the new wives, who sought to ridicule the much prized virtue of modesty, which epitomized the marriage woman. So I'm done with that section for now. All right. This is crazy. Woo! All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about Augustus legislating marriage laws, right? Let's go to this book here. And I might not get everything done in this video. I said I was going to make it like 3 hours. I know people on the East Coast are up. I know it's late, but more videos are soon to come. If I have more time, hopefully tomorrow, the 24th, I'll go ahead and do another live video, maybe about, I don't know, maybe about 3 p.m. And I can't spend that much time on it because that's the thing to do, but hopefully tomorrow I'll get in another video if I don't get all the information I want to bring out tonight. All right. After Paul left Corinth, Bruce Winter, we're going to go to page 125 and 126. Let's see here. All right. Augustus legislated on marriage, remarriage, and divorce. All right, so he was a Roman politician, pretty much. The reason for this was his concern about promiscuous marital unfaithfulness among Roman women of social status. Augustus thought licentious and adulterous conduct of married women with younger single men avoiding marriage was responsible for the falling birth rate among Roman citizens and the breakdown of family values. The legislation not only made adultery by a woman a criminal offense, which, as we have already noted, could be initiated only after her husband divorced her, but it also made the condoning of adultery by an injured husband an offense open to criminal prosecution and punishable by expulsion from society. This severe penalty of exile and loss of property for unwillingness of a husband to curb or punish his wife pressurized him into taking action against the profligate behavior of his new Roman wife. So the new Roman wife pretty much was these women since the Hetairai, who were demanded not to wear a cloth over their heads, signaling that they were prostitutes, right? These married women, they're called new women because the married women were acting like the prostitutes. They were deliberately taking their veil off or marriage veil off in order to get the attention of the husbands they were already married to. So the married women wanted to get their own husband's attention and not the husband get the attention of this prostitute over here. So this term new women was deemed for the wives who were deliberately taking off their marriage veil to get the attention of their husbands they were already married to. Right? So the conduct of subsequent Julio-Claudian emperors did not always provide a high moral paradigm for these new women to abandon the behavior of those who competed against them for their husband's amorous attention. So the wives, you had the wives competing with the prostitutes, and you had the prostitutes competing with the wives. This was going on in Roman Corinth. Woo! All right, Suetonius. Suetonius records that the knights persistently called. Let me go back. The legislation of Augustus was resisted at the time of its introduction. Suetonius records that the knights persistently called for its repeal at a public gathering. It would prove impossible to control powerful new Roman wives by legislation, even with such severe penalties. 1 Corinthians 5 itself provides evidence of the illicit sexual behavior of a wife with a younger man, for example, her stepson. So 1 Corinthians chapter 5. Let's go here for a hot second. Starting at verse 1, it says, "It is commonly reported that there is whoring among you, and such whoring as is not even named among the nations, so as one to have his father's wife." So the father's sons, the sons of the father, were having illicit sex with the father's wife. So this was the wife's stepson. That's what 1 Corinthians 5 is about. Wait. All right. And let's go back to Roman wives, Roman widows, and I'm gonna read this section real quick about Augustus's Lex Julia Law legislating over marriage. Let's go to page 39. All right, so Augustus's legislative program prescribed moral conduct, financial disadvantages in remaining single, the procreation of children with resulting career advantages, and dress codes for wives. It prescribed marriage between certain classes and punished inactivity on the part of husbands who ignored their wives' extramarital liaisons. The Real Housewives of Rome. Yeah. Oh, sis. Yeah, because that's what this is looking like. We think soap operas is a new American thing. This is a soap opera right here. This is reality TV right here. Who said that sounds like the side chick issues now? It's so normalized. Yeah, the Hattie ride. The Hattie ride. The prostitutes was allowed to be prostitutes. You know what I'm saying? Side chicks. It was legal. And a lot of our Israelite brothers, not all of them, but some of them, you know, they want to call it polygyny. All right, let me continue. Woo! It was a negative move against new Roman women that sought to curb their activity with their young sexual partners and to encourage bachelors to enter marriage and create a stable family by means of incentives. So Augustus in 17 BCE, right? He enacted Lex Julia de Maritandis Ordinibus and Lex Julia de Adulteris Coercindis, right? So there were incentives for having children and penalties for refusing to do so. So The Lex Julia de Adulteris Coercendis legislated on promiscuity, making it a public crime. And this is the thing, only women could be charged with adultery. Right? Under the legislation of Augustus, a wife's adultery was liable to public accusation and was tried by a judge and jury. Right? The new law expressly forbade the husband to kill his wife if caught in the act, but did permit him to kill the offender if he was an actor, a freedman, a member of the immediate family, a pimp, or anyone condemned by a public court. A husband was required to initiate legal action against her within 60 days. Otherwise, he left himself open to the charge of pimping. Nothing new under the sun. So McGinn, he's another historian. He has drawn attention to another far-reaching effect of the legislative program of Augustus, the regulation of clothing, which was originally designed to signal a woman's legal status and class. So women convicted of adultery were also compelled to wear the toga. I talked about this before, as a symbol of their shame, and they were no longer eligible to wear the marriage veil. So clothing's role as a status marker receives repeated recognition from the jurists. Augustus had taken upon himself to enact legislation for dress codes, which would distinguish the modest wife from the adulteress and the prostitute. By law, they were obliged to wear a kind of uniform, a short undergarment, which is called a tunica, without instita, the border laid in several plaits, and a toga in a dark color, by which they could be distinguished from respectable women. The Pharisees were enforcing it. Yeah, they brought the woman to be stoned. Yeah, we see where that comes from. Chapter 11, the Pharisees said, if these people are over here giving the Messiah this praise instead of us, we're going to lose our position with the Romans. They wanted positions with these Romans. Don't bring that woman by herself for adultery. She can't commit adultery by herself. You know what I'm saying? Man. Okay. One more page. According to McGinn, the Lex Julia specifies certain articles of clothing, such as the stola and vitae. I explained what that was before, as peculiar to matrone, and forbade these to be worn by prostitutes. So matrons were not compelled by law to wear the stola and the other matronal articles of clothing. The veil, however, was worn to signify the woman was married. They were both to be killed according to Torah. Exactly. So sis, we're seeing the difference between the law of Moses and Roman law. Context is now coming into play where we can see what Paul was talking about when he was talking about certain laws. A lot of what's in the Bible is not verbatim. Context and history is going to tell you. So Paul was disputing a lot of Roman law. Yes, God's law was just. In Romans 7, he says, God's law is spiritual and it's just and it's good. This Roman law is destructive. You know what I mean? Exactly, he says, a man gonna be a man. Now the thing is, this is my question. Do you want to be an Israelite man or do you want to be a Roman man? If you talk about you follow the laws of Moshe, right? Is you going to be a man who follows the laws of Moshe, or you going to be a dude following the laws of Romans? Poor boy. All right. Let me see. What else is there? All right, let me read one more thing about this Augustus Lex Julian marriage law. McGinn, McGinn, he has concluded that the Lex Julia et Papias established a hierarchy of marriages based in turn on received notions among the elite of the relationship between social position and moral worth. Like other rules the Romans developed in the field of sexuality and marriage, it sought to articulate a social order in terms of rank and gender, and to assure the reproduction of this order over time. It helped ensure that Augustus's recasting of the social order would not be temporary in its effects, but would be reproduced again and again in the future to the next generation. Come out of her, my people. Exactly. You're going to be Rome or you're going to be Israel. You're going to be Israel or you're going to be the nations. Exactly. It says, come out of her, my people. Come out of her. Establish this order back that was before the fall. All right. How much time I got? Oh, I got an hour and a half. All right, we're going to talk about the culture of patriarchy, where this patriarchy only came from. All right, we're going to talk about paterfamilias. Paterfamilias is the Latin word where we get head of household. That's where head of household comes from. How many of y'all thought it was a new American thing? All right, let's go to a book, Paul and Gender. Paul and Gender. Let's see here. So I'm not going to see the chat for a little while. I'm going to share the screen. We're going to go to Paul and Gender. We're going to talk about culture for a hot second. Let's see. Yep. Okay. Our understanding of the language and culture of the first century Greco-Roman world is vital to interpreting the Pauline letters. This chapter shows how the context of culture helps to explain Paul's language when he addresses gender and gender concerns. It is necessary to understand what Paul was trying to do with words in the light of the culture. Okay. All right. Let's go down here. Down there. Okay, when Paul employs the culture, when Paul employs the structure and vocabulary of the Greek language or refers to cultural symbols, metaphors, or practices about gender, we need to be alert as to how much of Greco-Roman cultural practices and worldview are part of Paul's message and what cultural assumptions are truly adopted by him. Okay. All right. Does Paul utilize and redefine common metaphors and practices in such a way that their meanings are transformed? The answer to this question in this study will be yes. Paul exploits Hellenistic literature, philosophy, symbols, and language to take every thought captive to Christ. We will see this, for example, in his discussion about the veil and his use of the metaphor of head. Paul used the Koine Greek language within a specific historical context. He was writing to specific recipients in specific historical situations. That's what we're seeing, right? All right, so we're going to talk about Paul's Hellenism and Palestinian Judaism. Okay. Paul lived in and moved back and forth between the broader Hellenized culture and Palestinian Judaism. How is Paul to be understood in his relationship to Greco-Roman culture? By definition, since he was a Jew born in Tarsus, Paul was a Hellenistic Jew. So, however, according to both Paul and Luke, Paul identified himself as a Pharisee, descended from a Pharisaic line with impeccable Jewish credentials. We see that from Philippians chapter 3, Acts chapter 23. Paul's claim that he was a Hebrew born of Hebrews may have meant that he spoke Aramaic or Hebrew in the home. All right. According to Luke's account, Paul most likely first received an elementary Hellenistic education in Tarsus and then later received a formal education in Judaism in Jerusalem, where he was thoroughly trained in the law under Gamaliel, right? Acts chapter 22. All right. He was trained in the Torah law, right? Torah law, and he also knew the Talmud or the oral law, right? They knew them both. So what does this say about his orientation to the Greco-Roman and Palestinian Jewish cultures of his day? In the first half of the 20th century, it was argued that Paul's primary orientation was to a syncretistic Hellenized Judaism, in which popular Greco-Roman philosophy provided the background of his thought. In the second half of the 20th century, the consensus of scholarship experienced a profound shift and began to argue that Paul's primary orientation in life and thought was to Palestinian Judaism. However, Palestinian Judaism was clearly embedded in Hellenism. Let me say that again. Palestinian Judaism was clearly embedded in Hellenism, and first century Jewish culture included complex sets of beliefs that were not uniform. They were not all of the same belief. That's why you have different sects. You have Pharisees, Sadducees, you have the Essenes, you have the Ebionites, you have the Nazarenes, Nevertheless, Judaism as a whole differentiated itself from the dominant Greco-Roman worldview and consciously resisted assimilation while continuing to exist as a subculture. That resistance, I don't know how much they were really trying to resist. You know what I'm saying? All right. One area in which Palestinian Judaism differentiated itself was sexual ethics. Watch this, y'all. It has been convincingly argued that there is continuity between Paul's ethical teachings about sexuality and the Jewish legal traditions. Most importantly, Peter Thompson demonstrated that Paul affirmed the law in his view on sexual relationships and sexuality. In the Greco-Roman world, wide-ranging sexual license was practiced, though a clear double standard existed in the sexual expectations for men and women that reflected the culture's beliefs about gender, hierarchy, and privilege. Right? There was sexual license practice. So it was pretty much, males, just because you was a male, Roman law gave you dominance over women. Paul's fundamental teaching on Christian behavior directly confronted prevalent Greco-Roman sexual practices and expectations, as we see from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. It says, finally, brothers and sisters, we ask and urge you in the Lord Jesus that as you learn from us how you ought to live and to please God, you should do so more and more. For you know what instructions we gave you through the Lord Jesus. He was talking about that's the will, right? But this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from fornication, this going around committing adultery with the Headcovering, right? That each one of you know how to control your own body in holiness and honor, not with lustful passion like the Gentiles who do not know God, Elohim, the Lord God of Israel, that no one wrong or exploit a brother or sister in this matter, because the Lord is an avenger in all things, just as we have already told you beforehand and solemnly warned you. Right? Now we're starting to see the cultural context of what Paul was saying to these Roman colony cities. Right? Paul not only confronted the sexual licentiousness of Hellenistic culture, but also what is much more revolutionary, he continued the Christian and Jewish practice of not maintaining a double standard of sexual ethics. So this is why I say I like Paul. A lot of people think Paul is a misogynist, and they go to Paul to try to defend their little opinions about how they need to be treating women. But Paul, once you actually peel back the layers with secular historical information, you can see that he was refuting all of this male domination, right? So although sexuality is only part of the gender issues, if Paul's sexual ethics have any logical coherence, then it is a significant indicator that Paul's theology of gender is going to be distinct from that of the dominant Greco-Roman culture. The claim that Paul would uncritically adopt a Greco-Roman model in the construction of his ethics or theology, particularly for his theology of gender, should be carefully re-examined. On the other hand, Paul was a part of the Greco-Roman culture and displayed familiarity with the formal and material characteristics of ethical Hellenistic literature. Granted, he did not hesitate to employ current forms, concepts, and standards, even secular ones already familiar to his readers. So Paul was a first century Hellenistic Jew who chose a Palestinian Jewish worldview as his primary orientation, and who also undertook a Christian mission to the Greco-Roman culture. In conducting this Gentile mission, Paul lived within Greco-Roman culture as one who understood it, and thus was well positioned to explain spiritual realities foreign to his recipients by using concepts that were familiar and easily understood. Right? So this is why we're saying, yeah, if you're going to read Paul's letters, understand that Paul knew what audience he was talking to. He had to use verbiage and language that they understood because they were living in that culture. Right? All right. Thought it was the IRS first to incentivize marriage through government law and politics. Oh, the U.S. No, ain't nothing new under the sun. The U.S. adopted a lot of their laws from the Romans. You can see some things in America adopted from Torah law, but a lot more of the law that the United States has adopted is Greco-Roman law. Let me go back to let me go back to the book here. All right. Paul stood at the intersection of Christianity, Judaism, and the broader Hellenistic world. From that position, he reread the law in relationship to his encounter with Christ on the road to Damascus and to his ministry experiences in the Gentile revivals in Antioch and his Gentile mission. So the law that he read was pretty much Torah law. Context tells us he was reading the Torah law to these Romans. You know, if they're coming over into the Most High Yahweh covenant of Israel through the Messiah, he has to read them that law. He has to read them Torah law, because these people he was talking to, they were so entrenched in Roman law, they had to be retaught Torah law. They have to be taught Torah law, right? Right. So as a result, he critiqued not only aspects of Greco-Roman culture, but also aspects of Jewish culture and elements in the developing institutional culture of the early church. Paul's utilization of Greco-Roman linguistic forms, cultural concepts, and ethical standards concerning gender needs to be carefully read and examined in light of the discourses and contexts in which these occur, in order to distinguish between what he critiques, what he transforms, and what he adopts. So, I'm almost done. Section 1.2, the Pauline relationship with the church and Greco-Roman society. Watch this, y'all. Paul attempted to establish Gentile churches within the context of the mainstream of Greco-Roman culture. So he's trying to establish the Most High Yahweh of Israel in his law in this world of this Greco-Roman culture who impose their immoral, unethical laws on people, especially women, right? So Paul's general purpose in writing his letters was to further his mission to the Gentiles by spiritually forming, guiding, and correcting the Gentile churches that had been founded by his mission team. Okay? Paul was very successful at contextualization for the purposes of communication and evangelism, which largely accounts for the success of his mission. One of the tricky aspects of Pauline studies involves accounting for the fact that in order to communicate spiritual realities, Paul would seek to use Greek language and metaphors that were meaningful to his Greco-Roman recipients. For example, Romans chapter 6, verse 19, I'm speaking in human terms because of your natural limitations, right? That's an example of that. However, though, he used Greek language embedded in the Hellenistic worldview. He intended for the church to be distinct from the world, which for him was a term that corresponded roughly to Greco-Roman society and culture. In other words, in order for his message to be communicated meaningfully, he deliberately employed commonly understood metaphors, conventions, and cultural institutions to transform the churches into a movement that was spiritually and ethically countercultural. So he used the language that his audience understood, right? To achieve this, Paul utilized common figures of speech, but did so in a manner so that such expressions frequently diverge from their normal meaning. Understanding Paul's beliefs about gender cannot simply be a matter of studying the meaning of words, understanding facts about the culture, and then imposing Greco-Roman notions of gender into Paul, right? Instances of language and particularly figures of speech are to be correctly understood in the context of the communicator's thought. Figures of speech, we all know what those are. We have them in our English language. You know what I mean? When we say a phrase, sometimes it's not to be taken literal. It's a figure of speech. All right, so the message of any communication must be understood in terms of its intended pragmatic effect on its recipients. Okay, when a speaker writer is trying to motivate listeners, recipients to perform a given action, different rhetorical strategies may be used other than simply issuing direct commands for people to take certain course of action. Okay. All right. Although this latter practice may be effective in some cases, it will not be effective in all cases. Sometimes the literal meaning is too provocative and may easily cause the listener recipient to reject the message as unwelcome, inappropriate, or incomprehensible. All right. All right, let me read this part. Section 1.3, contrast between rhetoric and practice in the first century. Let me see something real quick right here. Let me stop sharing. Let me come back to y'all. Let me see something here. How y'all doing out there? Y'all sleepy? Anybody sleepy? Okay. Okay. Cleaning and listening. That's the stuff. Good. All right, y'all good. That's good. Hey, this is some good stuff, huh? Man. This is some real good stuff. Woo! All right, let me go back. Let me go back to Paul and gender, culture. All right, let me share this screen. All right. Contrast between rhetoric and practice in the first century. So when we look at the first century context of opinions toward gender, we are not dealing merely with actual recorded practices regarding gender, but also with first century prejudices, with first century prejudices and rhetoric about what proper practices should be. That is, what the projected ideal man or woman should be. Society, legislating and enforcing the proper behavior of women was a major concern for authorities because they believed that disorder in the household had seditious ramifications for the welfare of the empire. Therefore, cults and sects were often attacked because of the wild behavior of the women participants. Wow. In order for Paul's Gentile mission to succeed, the behavior of Christian women, or Israelite believers in the Messiah, right? They would need to be consistent with what was practiced by women in the broader first century Greco-Roman world. So therefore, Paul's gender concerns were often missional when he addressed gender roles in the church and the home, and his intention was for believers to fit into the culture while remaining ethically pure. Okay? Fitting into the first century culture was a different proposition than fitting into the culture of the 21st century. Right? Modern Western preconceptions of how the genders normally behave and interact with one another are markedly different from the preconceptions of Greco-Roman culture. Check this part out, y'all. This is crazy. Hold on. All right, Okay. One of the factors that contribute to the disparity between practice and rhetoric is the continued influence of Aristotle on Greco-Roman society and culture. Aristotle, y'all know who Aristotle, right? Who Aristotle is? He's one of these Greek philosophers. A lot of the Greek philosophers and their rhetoric actually influenced this dominating over women, and influenced a lot of the patriarchy only idea that the Romans picked up. So that's why we're calling it a Greco-Roman culture. And a lot of the Greeks picked up their stuff from the Persians, the Babylonians, So wherever Hellenism went, it brought Athenian philosophy. Athens, Greece, right? Athens, Greece, where the Greeks were debating. Acts chapter 17. You can go back and look at that. With Athenian philosophy came rhetoric about the nature of male and female from the Athenian classical period that continued to be influential as early and medieval church philosophy developed. Aristotle advised his male readers on how to govern their wives because of women's essential inferiority. Y'all hearing this stuff? Pay attention. This is where it comes from. This is where these church fathers get their attitude towards women inferiority from. These Greek philosophers. Aristotle is one of the main ones. This dude is ill. Aristotle, Tertullian, they have some crazy things to say about women. Let me continue. Greeks believed that a gender-based hierarchy is based on the ontological nature of women and men rather than the standards or conventions of culture. According to Aristotle and Greek thought, the cosmic hierarchy is expressed in two genders that have mutually exclusive qualities. The perfect body is male or man, whose natural state is physical and political strength, rationality, spirituality, superiority, activity, dryness, and penetration. This is what Aristotle is saying, y'all. Meanwhile, female, women, embodies humanity's negative qualities, which are physical and political weakness, irrationality, fleshliness, inferiority, passivity, wetness, and being penetrated. So to Aristotle, male and female represent the hierarchy, superior, inferior, societal status, more or less, and sex role, penetrator, penetrated. Platonic Aristotelian ideas about the ontological nature of men and women and the relationship of the household to the general society had a direct influence on Roman Stoics and Hellenistic Jews, such as Philo and Josephus, who appeared to carry forward the same arguments and assumptions. Wow. Let me stop sharing just for a hot second. Yo, yeah, it's wrong, sis. And 1 Corinthians 9 confirms your descriptions of Paul's approach exactly. I know exactly what you're talking about, sis. This is crazy. Oh my gosh. I'm probably not gonna get to all of this, so I'll probably have to do another video tomorrow because I got like an hour left, unless y'all want to stay up late with me. I didn't want to make this too long, but man, this is a lot of good information. All right, let me go back to the book. Hold on for a second, y'all. Hold on. All right, let's go back to the book. Let's go back to the book. It's all in gender. Here we go. The pitter pat of the doggies. All right. In classical Athenian society, women were restricted to the seclusion of the domestic sphere. Right? That's where you get housewife from. You know, housewife. That's what people think wives is only good for, to be good at home. Domestic slaves. That's where this idea is coming from, y'all. Coming from these Greeks. These Romans picked up these Greek culture, right? So again, Athenian society, women were restricted to the seclusion of the domestic sphere as a measure of control, and they could leave the house only for religious ceremonies and in the company of their guardian. Philo's ideal for women in the first century Alexandria was little different, if not even more restrictive. Check this out. Let's read Philo's idea. It says, a woman then should not be a busybody. And pretty much that word busybody would like translate to a worker of magic or something like that. So a woman should not be a busybody, meddling with matters outside her household concerns, but should seek a life of seclusion. She should not show herself off like a vagrant in the streets before the eyes of other men, except when she has to go to the temple. And even then, she should take pains to go, not when the market is full, but when most people have gone home. And so, like a freeborn lady, worthy of the name, with everything quiet around her, make her obligations and offers her prayers to avert the evil and gain the good. Oh my gosh. And this goes to show, like, you know, when men talk about, oh, women should wear these type of clothes to not show their shape. Well, if men have a problem with a woman's shape, you should talk to the Lord God of Israel, Yahweh Elohim himself, because Yahweh Elohim made our bodies. You don't blame the Lord God of Israel for the way he shaped the woman. If a man can't control his lust and his sexual desires by looking at a woman's figure or shape, that's his problem. He needs to work out with the Lord God of Israel. I have a problem with that. Men talking about you need to wear something to control your shape or your form being seen. Really? We can't hide the fact that we got breasts. You know what I'm saying? Come on now. I think that's the most idiotic thing. That's my opinion inserted to this. But let me continue. So Philo, like Josephus and Paul, was writing for a Hellenized Jewish or a Hellenistic Roman audience, and there are a broad variety of views on women in early Jewish sources. So the Greek Athenian model for gender was easily combined with the rhetoric of Octavian's strict moral laws that came about in 18 and 9 BCE for at least the Roman upper class, which ostensibly were part of an effort to restore the traditional values of the Roman Republic in culture and religion. Hold on, y'all. Let me get this phone call real quick. Forgive me, that was my husband, y'all. When the husband calls, got to answer. You know what I'm saying? See? Tell them people out there the righteous women ain't got no problem being righteous. You know what I mean? I interrupted my live YouTube video to take a phone call from my husband. Hold on, y'all. All right. And thank y'all for taking the time to watch and listen. You know, feel free to share this with anybody you want, because this is good information, man. Not just sisters get to hear this, but our brothers, you know. All right, let me continue over here with Paul and gender. We see where this is coming from. It ain't coming from no Old Testament at all. All right. So the Greek Athenian model for gender was easily combined with the rhetoric of Octavian's strict moral laws for at least the Roman upper class, which ostensibly were part of an effort to restore the traditional values of the Roman Republic in culture and religion. Octavian's laws targeted promiscuity as well as a low population crisis among the Roman elite. He promoted the marriage of women, discouraged women from committing adultery, rewarded motherhood, and established dress codes for women that signaled a woman's legal status and class. Men's elite male rank was reinforced, and Octavian said that fathers were worthy to be called by this name, father, in the same way as I am. Now, I want y'all to mark this down and do some further research on this. Octavian became the paterfamilias of the empire, and the empire was run by his imperial household. Paterfamilias is called head of household, you guys. That's what it's translated from, or translating to. Is head of household. The father is the head of the household. So this dude became the head of the empire, right? His power over the Roman Empire was explicitly supported by a traditional view of the elite male, where the paterfamilias had absolute power over the family. Penalties and rewards pressured single men to marry and have children, and they were discouraged from having affairs with matrons. Dang. Therefore, the rhetoric of Hellenistic culture and the language of empire gave a powerful message of inferiority, control, restriction, and even the seclusion of women. On the other hand, men were not free from pressures and punishments, urging them to assume their prescribed gender roles. Men were seen in every part of the public sector, but they were restricted and constrained by the rhetoric about gender in ways that women were not. More was expected in terms of specific character traits, if not actual labor, and a harsher measure was applied to them. A man who displayed emotions, behavior, or characteristics labeled as feminine was shamed and despised for assuming a categorical low status role. This is why some of our men today run around thinking it's cool to be angry, bitter, upset, controlling, manipulative. They think those are not emotions. And they think those are things that only females have. You see where this attitude comes from. It comes from these Greeks and Romans, these Greek philosophers over here encouraging men to think this way. That's where that machismo or chauvinistic thing comes from. It comes from these Greeks and these Romans. You see what I'm saying? Talking about, oh, women get emotional. Really? The same things that they display are emotions, and they don't think they are. You know what I'm saying? Genesis chapter 24, verse 65. Let me look at that. Let me look at that real quick. Oh, you want to get to that part? Okay, Genesis 24:65. This is when Isaac met Rebekah. Said, and she had said to the servant, "Who is this man walking in the field to meet us?" And the servant said, "It is my master." She took a veil and covered her. Let me see something real quick, because that's taking me back to where I just came from. Hold on, real quick, sis. Let me finish reading this, and I'm gonna answer that, because that's good. I definitely had that in my notes to talk about. I got you. All right. We're gonna talk about where Moses veiled himself, and we're gonna talk about where Tamar veiled herself too. Tamar veiled herself as a prostitute. But the thing is, I would like for anyone to show of any of the commandments in the 613 or out of the 613 where it commands a woman to veil herself, to literally wear a headcloth on her head to signify that she's married. If anybody can start looking right now while I finish reading this, that'll be cool. And then I'll come back to Genesis chapter 24, verse 65. I'll also go into where Moses covered himself with a veil on his face. What's that? Exodus 34. And then talk about Tamar veiling herself. Hold on real quick, y'all. All right. So we got to get that. Hold on real quick. Okay, I left off here. It says, a man who displayed emotions, behavior, or characteristics labeled as feminine was shamed and despised for assuming a categorical status role. For example, certain emotional expressions, grief and mourning the death of a loved one, were considered feminine. Men who lived in certain regions of the Roman Empire or even Hellenists could be disrespected and ridiculed by Romans as effeminate. This is because some areas, such as Egypt, were known for women wives who exercised more freedom or authority than was allowed in the Roman ideal. Although there was a real potential of upward mobility and increased economic prosperity in the Roman Empire, honor came from knowing and keeping one's place. All right, the future of a man was more rigidly determined by his father's occupation, status, and entangling patron-client alliances, not to mention the fact that arguably the majority of adult males at any given time were not firstborn sons who were heirs but were still under the authority of a master or their own paterfamilias. All but Caesar was theoretically answerable to at least one patron, and patrons and male heirs had their own serious obligations to their clients. All right, let's answer Sis's question about Genesis chapter 24, verse 35. Let's read it in the Hebrew. Hold on real quick. Okay. Let me do this. Let me bring this up, and then I gotta get my dogs from outside. My dogs are really buggy. They're really needy. All right. Genesis 24, verse 65. Let's go back to the original Hebrew text. All right. Let's pull it up here in Bible Hub so we can all read it. All right, let's read from here. Watisa Rebecca et Eneha Watera et Yitzhak Wetifol Me'al Hagamal. Okay, so and lifted up Rebecca her eyes, and she saw Yitzhak, and she fell from on top of the camel. Okay, verse 65. Watomer el ha'ebed mi ha'ish halazeh haholek basade likraten. And she said to the servant, right? Who or what is this man? Who or what is this man? Halak that walks in the field to see us, right? Wayomer ha'ebed hu adoni watikak hasaif watitkas a veil. Okay, so she took a veil and covered herself. Now she took a veil and covered herself. Let's look at the Strong's word for a veil. Hasaif. 6809. A wrapper, a shawl, or a veil. A wrapper, a shawl, or a veil. Okay, she took a wrapper, a shawl, or a veil. So a wrapper, a shawl, or a veil, that's what she took. And watitkas, that's a Hephchovah word. 3680, to cover herself. Kasa, to cover. Okay, so my thing is this. Let's look here. Roche. Let's go back. So does it say does it say Chasaif, Rosh? Does it say she covered her head? Or does it say she covered herself? I mean, I like to look at the original language here because it's going to be specific when somebody covers. Let's look at Exodus 34 real quick. Let me get my dogs. Come on. Let's look at Exodus 34. Let me stop sharing the screen here. Let's look at Exodus, what is it, Exodus 34? Hold on. All right, let's look at Exodus 34. And what is it? 33. Exodus 34 and 33. وآخر كان نجشوا كل بني إسرائيل وزوام את כל אשר דיבר יהוה איתו בהר סיני. Right? 33. ויקול משה מדבר איתם ויתן על פני Maswe. Okay, so when Moses finished speaking with them, he put on his face a veil. So he put on his face a veil. So it's being specific where he put this veil. You know, in the Hebrew, the language is very concrete and it's going to be specific. So he put this veil on his face. Let's look at this word for veil, because this is different than what we saw previously in Genesis chapter 24. What is that? Verse 65. A veil. He put this veil over his face. Let me see if it's something different here. So the veil that was in Genesis chapter 24, 65 was Hatzaif. She put a wrapper or a shawl or a veil over her. It didn't even say it put it on her rosh. You know what I mean? It just said it put it over her. And then the Strong's word in Exodus 34, when Moses put a veil over his face, um, 4533, maswe, a veil, to cover with a veil. V-E-I-L or V-A-I-L it has here. What is that other one? Exodus. Is it Exodus 38? Or am I? Okay. So more like a shawl. Usually veil was red. Who says the veil was red? Where's that? It's a custom. Like if a veil was worn over the head, maybe it was a custom. They was over there in the hot lands, you know what I mean? Keep the flies away, keep the sun away, or, you know, veiled herself. But, you know, when we see Rebecca did that, but where do we see Rachel and Leah wearing a veil? You know, where do we see Sarah wearing a veil? Where do we see any other woman wearing a veil, you know, to signify that she was married? So I'm not saying don't wear one. I'm saying if you want to wear one, wear one. If you're convicted to wear one, go ahead. I actually, when I pray, I put a prayer shawl over my head. I go into my secret closet and I pray. You know what I mean? So, sometimes as our culture, we cover ourselves. That's it. Yeah, you cover yourself. But specifically, what are you covering? Are you covering your body with a burqa like, you know, the Muslim women do? Or are you covering your head, you know, and if you're covering your head, you know, what do we see that at? You know what I mean? And the thing is, custom is different from commandment. You know what I mean? I think that's what we get. Things maybe misconstrued. So culturally, it was Syrian in the Old Testament. What do you mean Syrian? What do you mean Syrian, sis? So culturally, it was Syrian in the Old Testament. I mean, a lot of the customs was practiced by the Israelites that went on in Ur Chaldee, Mesopotamia. You know what I mean? But what I'm saying is, when our Israelite men say it's a commandment for a woman to cover the hair, they have to go into Torah law and show it as a commandment. That's what I'm saying. Genesis 38. That's where I wanted to go to. In Genesis 38, Yehuda saw there was a daughter of a certain Canaanite woman whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name Er. So this is the story of Tamar. So Tamar was supposed to marry one of the sons of Yehuda, right? Tamar was told that the father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she dressed up. She took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which was on the way to Timnah. So that's Genesis 38 and 14. Abraham was Syrian. Rebecca, Abraham's people. I thought Abraham was Chaldean. Where does it say that Abraham was Syrian? But yeah, but let me read Genesis 38 and 14 in the Hebrew, and let me get back to the other information I was bringing out. Hold on. Right. You put on a hair wrap, you know, you put on a hair wrap or a scarf or a prayer shawl or whatever, you know what I mean? So, so if that's what you're compelled to do, that's what you're compelled to do. That's what the Holy Spirit convicts you to do. But when you have policing of clothing and attire like it's a commandment from these people, then we have to say, like, you know, are you policing me righteously? You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm getting at. So let me see. Let's look at Genesis 38 and 14 in this Hebrew. You know, I'm talking about some of the people trying to police some of us sisters saying you got to do this and got to do that. But I'm like, if you can't find no Torah law commandment for it, then no, we ain't got to do it. It's a choice. You see what I'm saying? The thing is, where there's Torah, there is liberty. That's what Paul talked about in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. There's supposed to be a liberty. There's supposed to be a joy and a peace and a love. You know what I'm saying? All right. Let me go here. Where is it? Verse 14. So, Watasar bigde al minuta mealeha right? The chas batsaif with a veil, right? With the wrapper or shawl or a veil covered. She covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself. So she covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself. Where is the saying rosh? Where's the Hebrew word for rosh? You know what I mean? And when she did this, when Tamar did this, right, what did it signal? Verse 15, and Yehuda saw her and reckoned her for a whore, for a prostitute, for she had covered her face. So, I mean, the thing is, we got to get context of why these certain things were going on. You know what I mean? This veiling, just covering yourself or whatever. But as a woman, I do cover myself with a prayer shawl when I pray. That is something I do by choice. All right? All right. Let me go back over here to, but what I'm talking about, sis, is pretty much with this veil, excuse me, with this head covering thing. When the men, they don't take you to Torah first. When they take you to 1 Corinthians 11, which is not scripture, it's Paul talking to these Corinthian people. And the Corinthian people in that context, you have to go to their cultural practices, norms, and customs and laws. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm bringing out. I'm bringing out that cultural context of the head covering. You know what I mean? There was a definite Roman law for a woman to literally cover her head to signal that she was married. You see what I'm saying? Let me bring up something real quick. Let's go to Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7. Before I go back to the book. Watch this. All right. Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7, verse 36. And one of the Pharisees asked him, Yeshua, to eat with him. And he, Yeshua, went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. And see, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Yeshua sat at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of perfume. And standing behind at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and wiping them with the hair of her head, and was kissing his feet and anointing them with the perfume. Now, it says she was weeping and the tears fell on his feet, and she was wiping the tears with her hair. Now, was her hair covered with a cloth? How was her hair able to be used to wipe the tears off of Yeshua's feet? Did it say she took off the scarf? I know some people say Numbers 5:18 says, you know, it insinuates that a woman was wearing a cloth on her head, but we have to understand Hebrew idioms. You know, loosen the hair. You're pretty much being shamed pretty much because you're going through a lie detector test to see if your husband's jealousy is forthcoming and forthright because he thinks you slept with another man. You know what I mean? You got a lie detector test for to be upon you. So loosen the hair or unbind the head. Say that she took off the literal cloth. Is the word for veil even there in Numbers 5:18? You know what I mean? You got to go back and look at the actual Hebrew words. That's what I like to do. So that's just one example. All right. Let's go back to the book. 10:01. Paul and gender. Okay. Let me read something to you about Paterfamilias from the Oxford Encyclopedia of the Bible about head of household. I'm just going to go over this real quick. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm probably going to have to do another video. Hopefully I can bring it out tomorrow. And then do that. All right. So family and familia. An investigation, reading for right here, and any investigation of economics and gender must begin with the family, which function as the basic social and economic unit in the Roman world. Production and commerce were centered on the family, which was also the primary mechanism for transferring wealth and property across generations. This idea of family encompassed two interconnected issues. The first was a legal definition of family that was based upon the concept of the paterfamilias and its relationship to property rights. Paterfamilias is best translated as head of household and described the eldest male in a direct agnatic lineage. The familia consisted of all the descendants of the paterfamilias, which were the children, the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, following a male descent line. The second was an understanding of family as the unit formed by parents and their children. Authors frequently use the term domus, house, to refer to the household or nuclear family. Under Roman law, a male paterfamilias possessed complete financial and legal power over his descendants. This meant that a paterfamilias alone possessed legal ownership over the property held by members of his family. Children, grandchildren, and possibly the wife of the paterfamilias could own nothing, and anything acquired by these individuals became the legal property of the paterfamilias. When a paterfamilias died, each of his sons and quite possibly his daughters became a paterfamilias in his or her own right. Social custom dictated that all children, including daughters, should inherit on an equal or near equal basis. Right? Let me see something here. The Roman economy swelled during the military expansion of the Republican era, and the increasing amount of wealth and complexity of commercial transactions made this system of property ownership increasingly cumbersome and inefficient. Accordingly, Roman law developed the peculium as a means to mitigate the situation. The peculium was a fund granted by the paterfamilias to someone in his possessus, a daughter or grandson, slave, etc., to manage as his or her own money in order to pay for life expenses. The individual treated this money as his or her own, but it remained the legal property of the paterfamilias, and it was revocable at any time. So, on our taxes over here in America, got this thing, the single, head of household, married, all that, right? This is the originator of the head of household. In a landmark study on life expectancy, Richard Soller added a new wrinkle to our understanding of the paterfamilias and the economic landscape of ancient Rome. Combining data from funerary monuments, comparative demographic information, and a very sophisticated computer modeling program, he determined that the relatively short life expectancy in the Roman world meant that most adults would not have been in the power of a paterfamilias. So, using the most optimistic assumptions, his model shows that more than 25% of all Roman children would have lost their father by the age of 15. Nearly 50% would have lost their father by 25, and 80% would have lost their father by the age of 40. So, life expectancy wasn't that long, and children lost their fathers, at young ages. So what we see going on over here in America is not much totally different from what went on over in Rome. So the rights of women. Just real quick, Roman women possess greater property rights and economic agency than women in nearly any other pre-modern society. They could own land and possessions, form contracts, and conduct financial transactions. Roman law protected the assets of married women, requiring that they held independently from those of their husbands. This was especially important because the social expectations regarding equal distribution of patrimonies meant that women had a realistic opportunity to acquire wealth. Upon the death of her father or her husband, if she was under his potestas, a woman would become independent and a paterfamilias in her own right. Finally, Roman women possessed the right to make wills and control the distribution of their assets after their death. So if you guys can go back and read some more of that, that's the Oxford Encyclopedia of the Bible. All right? All right. Okay, you guys are conversing there. Okay. I'll let you converse there in the chat then. All right. Let me go here. Talk about a little bit who influenced the patriarchy. I read some of this before in what I brought out earlier in this video, but for the last 20 minutes, I'm gonna cover who influenced the patriarchy, and then whatever I don't get to cover in this video, I'll cover in another video. Hopefully tomorrow I'll do that at 3 p.m. 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'll get that in. All right. All right. Patriarchy, who influenced dominance over women, the Greek philosophers. So let me go to this book right here. After Paul left Corinth, I'm going to go to page 124, just to read this real quick. All right. So I think I read this on the first video. Let me read this again. Of course, there was a double standard in marriage, right? There was this speech delivered by the orator at the marriage bed of the newlywed couple. So a newlywed couple in the Roman colony of Corinth, they would have this speech delivered to them, right? It's called the bedroom speech. It's called the bedroom speech. And Plutarch, writing in the 1st century AD, provides an example of such a speech delivered to two young friends. It demanded of the woman religious faithfulness to her husband's gods and acceptance of his casual sexual encounters with a maidservant or with high-class prostitutes at dinners. Sexual liaisons were a means of gratifying lust. So it would be inappropriate for him, the husband, to find this sexual release with his wife. So Plutarch informed this new bride of this thing she had to succumb to. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sis, Mother Malaka does have a point. Rome adopted a lot of culture from the Greeks. Greeks adopted a lot of stuff from the Babylonians and Persians. You know what I mean? Like I said, if you've got cultures surrounding you, you start to pick up on their culture, and you start assimilating and picking up their ways and things of that nature. So hold on, y'all. All right. Hellenism. I mean, that's what Hellenism did. Sis. Hellenism is the culture of the Greeks, and a lot of the Greeks picked up culture from the Babylonians and Persians. Israelites picked up a lot of culture from the Babylonians and Persians because, you know, if you're surrounded by the Greeks and Romans who pick this stuff up, what you're going to do? You're going to pick it up and think it's your own. When you do things for so long, you think it's your own. After Paul left Corinth, I already read that, what I wanted to read. I'm going to now go into this book called Paul and Empire. I think this is the first time for me picking up this book. Yeah, a cultural thing. Like I said, I do not cover my hair. But the thing is, like when I pray, I put the shawl over my head, and go, as a prayer closet, and I go into, seclusion. Just me and the Father. You know what I mean? So, all right. I'm going to read pages 237 to 241 in this book here. Let's see. All right, so in discussing the Sitz Im Leben of the household code form, exegetes have arrived at different interpretations the way a house was run. While a few scholars think that the demands for the obedience and submission of wives, children, and slaves are genuinely Christian, the majority of scholars sees the domestic code as a later Christian adaptation of a Greco-Roman or Jewish Hellenistic philosophical theological code. Okay. Most recently, scholars have pointed to the treatises on economics and politics that reflect a form already codified by Aristotle. Right. The moralists of the early empire sought to formulate an ethics that would find a balance between the absolute traditional demands of subordination and obedience to the paterfamilias and the ideals of equality formulated in the Hellenistic age. What comes to the fore in the household code form of the New Testament is the option for an ethically softened or humanized notion of domination and rule. In antiquity, the household was hierarchically ordered, right? It was hierarchically ordered. And when slaves are added to the family, it can be called a house. And several households constitute a village, and several villages a city-state. A city-state is called a politia. All right. All right. It is part of the household science in Roman law. Is part of the household science to rule over wife and children as freeborn. The husband exercises republican government over the wife. And this is Aristotle again. Aristotle says, for the male is by nature better fitted to command than the female, in the older and fully developed person than the younger and immature. It is true that in most cases of republican government, the ruler and ruled interchange and turned, but the male stands in this relationship to the female continuously. The rule of the father over the children, on the other hand, is that of a king. So, let's see. Aristotle points to the rule of the soul over the body. Check this out. Like I said, I read about a little bit of Aristotle before, how he influenced a lot of what the male domination attitude, comes from. So he says, it is manifest that it is natural and expedient for the body to be governed by the soul, and for the emotional part to be governed by the intellect, the part possessing reason, whereas for the two parties to be on equal footing or in the contrary positions is harmful in all cases. Also, as between the sexes, the male is by nature superior and the female inferior, the male ruler and the female subject. These are by nature slaves for whom to be governed by this kind of authority is advantageous. These natural differences justify the relationships of domination in household and state. This is Aristotle, right? So he's saying there are by nature various classes of rulers and ruled. The free rules, the slave, the male, the female, all possess the various parts of the soul, and the female has it, but without full authority. Aristotle acknowledges one exception when women can rule with authority, but when the husband controls everything, it becomes an oligarchy. Sometimes when the wife is an heiress, it is she who rules. In these cases, then authority goes not by virtue, but by wealth and power, as in oligarchy. So since However, every household is part of the state. Every household is part of the state. The state is jeopardized if the different forms of household rule are not exercised faithfully. So freedom in regard to women is detrimental both in regard to the purpose of the politia, city-state, right? It is clear that the state also is divided nearly into half, it is clear that the state also is divided nearly in half into its male and female population, so that in all city-states in which the position of women is badly regulated, one half of the state must be deemed neglected in framing the law. So this was Aristotle's view, right? This is Aristotle's view. What is the Messiah's view? Let's go back to it. Matthew 20. Matthew 20, verse 25. But Yeshua called them near and said, you know that the rulers of the nations are masters over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you, let him be your servant, even as the Son of Adam did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Right? I'm stressing, man. All right. Aristotle defined the nature of woman as that of someone who does not have full authority to rule. That goes contrary to Genesis chapter 1, when the Father made male and female in the image of and likeness of him, which is spirit. Spirit consists of masculine and feminine principles, right? It said the Lord God made male and female, mankind, and he gave them, male and female, the command to rule and subdue the earth, the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and the creeping things, right? If you go back to Genesis 1, it does not command that male rule over women, and it does not command that women rule over male. All right. So we see, I don't know, people back in those days, these Greeks and these Romans, they changed the culture of the people around them, and it was just a topsy-turvy from what was laid from the foundation of the Torah. That's why the Father said, when you go into these lands, tear down these people's altars, pillars. Do not let your daughters marry their sons. Do not let your sons marry their daughters. Do not assimilate into their culture. That's why the Father kept saying this. All right. Aristotle continuing, he said the definition of women's nature, women's proper sphere, is rooted in a certain relation of domination and subordination between man and woman, having a concrete political background and purpose. Western misogynism has its roots in the rules for the household as the model of the state. So a feminist theology, therefore, must not only analyze the anthropological dualism generated by Western culture and theology, but also uncover its political roots in the patriarchal household of antiquity. Aristotle's political philosophy revitalized in Neo-Pythagorean and Stoic philosophy. That's what it was rooted in. These Greek philosophers, that's why Shaul had a problem with them, or Paul had a problem with them in Acts chapter 17, right? It was also accepted in Hellenistic Judaism. And Philo insists wives must be in servitude to their husbands. See these Jews picking up these Greco-Roman ways. In their marriage laws and the birth and upbringing of children, Jews fulfilled the laws of Romulus's politia, or city-state, which the Romans had imposed on the whole empire. Jewish women were good Roman citizens. Check this out. The woman, says the law, the Roman law, is in all things inferior to the man. Let her accordingly be submissive, not for her humiliation, but that she may be directed, for the authority has been given by God to the man. That's what Roman law says. And the thing is, they try to put the stamp of the Lord God of Israel on it to try to make it suffice and stand as authoritative. Let me continue. All right. Plutarch describes the ideal marriage as a co-partnership. It is a lovely thing for a wife to sympathize with her husband's concerns and the husband with the wife's, so that as ropes being intertwined get strength from each other. The co-partnership may be preserved through the joint action of both. So, Plutarch, these Greek philosophers, that's where we get the term tie the knot. Because he's saying as ropes, male and female are intertwined, they get the strength from each other. So we're getting a lot of stuff from these Greeks and Romans. You know what I'm saying? So it is apparent that in antiquity, rules of the household are part of economics and politics, as are religious rites and ancestral customs. The well-being of the state and religious observance of laws and customs of the patriarchal family are intertwined. Wives who do not worship the gods of the paterfamilias, the pagan gods, right, violate not only their household duties, but also the laws of the state. The praxis of co-equal discipleship between slaves, masters, women and men, Jews and Greeks, Romans and barbarians, rich and poor, young and old, brought the Christian community into tension with its social political environment. Of course it did. This tension, engendered by the alternative Christian vision of Galatians 3:28, and not by enthusiastic excesses, became the occasion for introducing the Greco-Roman patriarchal order into the house church. Colossians and Ephesians testify that realized eschatology, rooted in the dualism between this world and the world above, is responsible for developing a theological justification of the patriarchal order. Galatians 3:28. So this tension of the laws of the Romans came about because Paul was teaching this. Paul was teaching Galatians 3:28. Galatians, yes, was also a Roman colony too. Rome took over the whole empire. And there's also historical information that says that Paul wrote the book of Romans from the city of Corinth. Galatians 3:28. It says, let's start at verse 27. Galatians chapter 3, verse 27 says, "For as many of you as were immersed into Messiah have put on Messiah. There is not Yehudi nor Greek. There is not slave nor free. There is not male and female, for you are all one in Messiah." So Paul was trying to establish you are all one in Messiah. You are no longer classified by rank and social status like the Roman law give when you come into the body of Israel through Messiah. All right, Numbers 30. Numbers 30 was talking about the father or the husband to void out a woman's oath. Does that establish a hierarchy? No. The hierarchy that the Romans, the Greeks and the Romans were impressing upon one another were domination. the thing about a father or a husband voiding out a woman's oath is that she's under his protection pretty much. She was treated the Israelite woman was treated like a precious ruby or diamond. You know what I mean? What do you do with a precious ruby or diamond? You protect it, you guard it, you don't let nobody tamper with it. You know what I mean? You treat it like it's invaluable. You know what I mean? The Romans and the Greeks, they treated their women like trash. Israelite women didn't get treated like trash. The thing is, there is order. The Father does everything in decency and in order. But the way the Romans and Greeks were doing things were in rank. Oh, just because I'm a male, I have rank or dominance over you. No. A father or a husband has the duty to protect what is precious and make sure that what's precious doesn't get tampered with. See what I'm saying? We didn't get treated like trash. You know what I mean? This is property right here. This is property. This cup is property. You know what I can do with this property? I can set it up on a mantle. I can dust it off. I can clean it. You know what I mean? Or I can treat this as property like the Greeks and the Romans do and just throw it away like trash. Let people run up into it, run trains on it and everything. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, the Father does do things in decency and in order, but there is no hierarchy. We are one in the spirit. We are echad. Male and female are echad. We have one common goal in mind. If we are made in the image and likeness of the spirit, then we see the elements of the spirit, they come together and work together. You know what I mean? Exactly. Like, yeah, exactly. Like how Levi and them killed that whole town over Dina. Exactly. You ain't gonna make no hole out of our sister. You know what I'm saying? Rome legalized prostitution. Over in Israel, the Father said, don't make your daughters whores. And don't let your males be prostitutes either. Right? Right. All right. Let me see something here. I'm gonna close this out. This is 3-hour long video. I still have some more to read and still have some information to give out. But I did say I was going to bring some bonus information. I'm bringing a little bit of bonus information about the wearing the pants thing. A sister of mine did ask me about this, and I said I would do a little bit of it. I tend to more still care about what the Most High Yahweh say than about what man say. You know, man got his opinion, and sometimes man expresses his opinion like it's a command of God. But let me do this real quick. Herodotus is a Greek historian born in the Persian Empire. He lived about the 5th century BCE. He talked about some things about pants. Let me see this. I'm going to do a little bit of this and I'm going to close this out. Let me see. No. Sorry, I got so much silence right now. I'm trying to find where I bookmarked this stuff. Okay, according to Herodotus, when Greek soldiers met the Scythians in battle, they were amazed to see. excuse me, they were amazed to see Scythian women on horseback fighting alongside the men, all wearing pants and decorated armor. When they went back to Greece, they immortalized those Scythian women for posterity as the legendary Amazons in their poetry and art. I'm reading from a site called thetoast.net, Wearing the Pants, a brief Western history of pants. Here goes a picture, Scythian woman wearing this pants right here. All right. You can go get some more insight from here. It says women in the American West wore pants as a practical necessity. The West was no place for long skirts. It was either muddy or dusty, and skirts were a hindrance while doing the physical labor that frontier life required. That's from that. Let me read another article here that gives a little more of the dates when all this started coming out. All right. This is from a website called esnpc.blogspot.com. This is an article called From Breeches to Trousers to Pantaloons, a Take Charge History of Wearing Pants. There was a band that's called She Wears the Pants. It's a New Jersey cover band, and the band draws their name from an ancient English idiom. Right? To wear the pants or trousers. Traditionally, men wore pants and women did not. But as you see, Herodotus said he saw Scythian women wearing pants. And he lived during the what? The 5th century BCE. Okay. Men also liked to imagine themselves to be in charge. So we're talking about these English European people. See where we're getting this from? I don't have no problem with European people, but I just got to bring the truth out to life. So let me say that again. Men also liked to imagine themselves to be in charge or project the image of being in charge. So to wear the pants, trousers was an idiom that meant to be the person in charge. The idiom, which is a phraseology not to be taken literally, it's a phrase that pretty much means something else. Like, over here in America, we say, oh, we're in a pickle. Well, we're not literally in a cucumber that's been sitting in some liquid. You know what I mean? It means to be in a bind. So when somebody says when they're in a pickle, they're in a bind or a tight spot or a hot place, right? So the idiom is frequently used to refer to the person in charge within a marital relationship, but it is also used figuratively to refer to any person in a position of authority over others. The idiom dates back to at least 1612. That's the 17th century. Us blacks, our black ancestors, we were still over here in slavery, right? That's what this idiom dates back to. So the idiom dates back to at least 1612, the year 1612, in one form or another, and perhaps earlier. In its earliest form, it was generally formulated as "where's the breeches?" Over the years, it has since appeared as trousers, pantaloons, or pants, as the language of fashion evolved or changed. All right, so the earliest examples of idioms that the person who wrote this article could find is from a body poem or epigram by Sir John Harrington, a courtier and inventor of the flush toilet. So this idiom, meaning who's in charge, came from the English white Europeans. And my thing is, if any Israelite man out there talk about he don't like the white man, why is he taking on the white man culture? and saying it came from the Lord God of Israel. All right. So I'm going to do another video tomorrow. I have a lot more to cover. But I do want to let me bring some more things out just for a few more minutes. We have Deborah from Judges chapter 4. If I can get to it. We have Deborah from Judges chapter 4. She was a judge in those days. She was a prophetess. She was a wife. You see, she didn't get permission to do what thus said Yah. Y'all told her to do something, she went to do it. Yael went out to meet the king of Sisera. She pretty much killed that dude who was making war with the Israelite people of that time, and she killed him with a tent peg and a hammer. You know what I'm saying? There's this woman in Second Samuel. She's just called a wise woman. See, a lot of our brothers just want to call us wicked. But the thing is, call out the righteous women who are righteous. Call out the women who are wise. You know what I mean? There's a lot of wise women in here. The wise women in 2 Samuel chapter 20. If you read the whole chapter 20, start at verse 1. But this wise woman, she comes on the scene in verse 16. This wise woman, right? She gathered up all these people, got this guy who was the enemy of Israel to be beheaded, and she was like, look, this person's head is going to be thrown over the wall to you. You know what I mean? People don't want to talk about that. People don't want to talk about the women who actually helped Israel. You know what I mean? Let's go to 2 Kings chapter 22 real quick. 2 Kings chapter 22. And then women didn't get permission from no man to do what thus said Yah. When the Father tells you to do something, you are a vessel, you are to be obedient. That's what it's called. You know, if you're a prophet or a prophetess, you are directly sent from the Most High, and you speak as an ambassador for the Most High. You say exactly what the Father tells you to say. 2 Kings chapter 22. There was these kings. There was a king, Yoshiyahu in that time. He was 8 years old. These priests, Hilkiah was the high priest, and then there was a scribe named Shaphan. They found this book of the Torah in the house of Yahweh, right? They found this book of the Torah of Moses in the house of Yahweh, right? And verse 11 says, it came to be when the king heard the words of the book of the Torah, he tore his garments. And the king commanded Hilkiah the priest, Ahakim the son of Shaphan, Akbor son of Micaiah, and Shaphan the scribe, and Asaiah a servant of the king, saying, go inquire of Yahweh for me. So this king is telling these priests to go inquire of Yahweh Elohim, right? Verse 14 says, then Hilkiah the priest and these 5 men, they went to Huldah the prophetess. She was the wife of Shalom, son of Tikwa, son of Harhas, keeper of the wardrobe. She was dwelling in Jerusalem in the 2nd quarter, meaning she was in college. This was a highly educated woman. She was a prophetess. Notice that 5 men were sent to this woman to inquire of what thus said Yahweh. Right? Now, notice it didn't say she went to go get permission from her husband to speak or say anything of thus said Yahweh. Right? So these 5 men were told to go to this woman and get some insight on what this book of the Torah was saying and what the Most High Yahweh was saying. Right? Then we have the book of Esther. We have the book of Esther. Right? Who saved Israel? Who helped save Israel from the turmoil? So all through the Old Testament, you see women of the Most High Yahweh being treated very great. You see women of the Most High Yahweh being able to fulfill their roles of Ezer Kenegdo, or one who aids, delivers, and protects and corresponds. You know what I mean? That's what Ezer Kenegdo means. You see the women being allowed to be the women that the Most High Yahweh created them to be in the Old Testament. You don't see all of this misogyny until you get to the New Testament. And that's because during the New Testament times, there was a lot of Hellenism going on. A lot of Hellenism. A lot of the Israelites taking on the ways of the Greeks and the Romans. All right. So you're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. I will be doing another video tomorrow. Hopefully I can get through the information I got to bring out tomorrow. But it's a lot to cover. I've been reading these books for the past couple of months, and it's been a lot to cover. So I've been reading from, once again, the books are called Beyond Sex Roles, what the Bible says about a woman's place in church and family. You're welcome, sis. You're welcome. The author of that book is Gilbert Bilezikian. Bilezikian, Bilezikian. I also picked up this information from a book called Paul and Gender, Reclaiming the Apostles' Vision for Men and Women of Christ. The author for this is Cynthia Long Westfall. All right. Roman Wives, Roman Widows, Bruce Winter. Paul and Empire, Richard Horsley. And After Paul Left Corinth, Bruce Winter. All right. If you guys have anything further you want to ask, I'll leave the comment section open. Feel free to share this. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you who joined in tonight was edified by the information that I brought out. Most High Yahweh willing, I will get to do a video tomorrow at 3 p.m. for you guys. I'll probably make it between 2 to 3 hours long. All right. But I want to make sure we start to spread some love, some joy, some peace, and compassion in this walk. We're supposed to be displaying the fruits of the Spirit. We're supposed to be living in the blessings, not the curses. And if the Most High can use me as a vessel to help bring that in this Israelite faith and walk, this, so be it. I love y'all, and I want to see us men and women get along. I want to see us live in the blessings. All right. So remember to spread love, compassion, grace, mercy, and peace, patience out there to the people. Shalom, shalom. Lila Toe. It's your girl Shanti Ashanti signing off. Shalom.